I hid my billion-dollar fortune from my daughters, and in the end, only one passed the loyalty test. I know how shocking that sounds, but when you've spent a lifetime building wealth, you learn that money changes people, even family. What I discovered wasn't just about greed or inheritance. It was about love, betrayal, and the heartbreaking truth of who really stood by me when everything else was gone. And to understand why I did it, you first need to know how I built the fortune that became both my greatest gift and my greatest curse. I wasn't born into money. In fact, I was born into the exact opposite. If you had seen the boy I once was, the boy with torn shoes, the boy who patched the soles with cardboard just to keep the rain out, you would have never believed he would one day be called a billionaire. My beginning was small and, at times, humiliating. We lived in a 2-room house with walls so thin the winter winds came right through. The roof leaked every time it rained. My father worked himself to the bone as a mechanic. My mother stretched every coin until it screamed. We didn't have much, but what we did have was pride, love, and the quiet determination to survive. I can still remember the taste of hunger. It wasn't just in my stomach, it was in my bones, in my very spirit. At 12 years old, I made a promise to myself. I will never live like this again. I will never let my children live like this. That hunger became the fire that pushed me forward. While other kids played ball in the streets, I worked. I fixed bicycles for spare change. I carried groceries for neighbors. I delivered newspapers in the biting cold. Every coin I earned went into a jar I kept hidden under my bed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And every day I looked at that jar and reminded myself this is only the beginning. When I finally stepped into the world of business, I wasn't handed a golden ladder. I wasn't given connections. I had nothing but grit, stubbornness, and an unshakable refusal to quit. My first company was a logistics business. I started with 2 trucks, one of which broke down more than it ran. I had no investors, no cushion. There were weeks when I didn't know if we'd make payroll. Nights when I slept in the office, too exhausted to drive home. I remember once, I went 3 days eating nothing but stale bread and black coffee because I had to choose between feeding myself or fueling the trucks. I chose the trucks. And while others slept soundly, I studied balance sheets I didn't fully understand, contracts I barely knew how to read, business books I borrowed from libraries because I couldn't afford to buy them. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. 1 client turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. The fleet grew. I reinvested every single dollar. While my friends bought new cars and lived in luxury apartments, I drove the same rusted sedan and lived in a 1-bedroom flat. I poured everything back into the business because I wasn't building for the present. I was building for the future. By 35, I wasn't just running a logistics company anymore. I was running a distribution network, a warehousing chain, an investment arm. Every risk I took seemed reckless to others, but I knew where I was heading. And when I finally crossed into billionaire territory, Forbes printed my name. People shook my hand differently after that. They looked at me differently. I wasn't just a man anymore. I was a fortune walking on 2 legs. But let me tell you something, when you reach that level, joy is the first thing you feel. Fear is. Fear of losing it. Fear of being used. Fear that no one will ever see you for who you really are again. Friends began to circle me like vultures. Old acquaintances reappeared, suddenly calling me brother and asking for loans. Even family members hinted at shares of wealth they thought they deserved. That's the curse of wealth. It blinds people. You stop being a father, a son, a friend. You become a vault. And everyone is holding out their hands, waiting for you to open it. But in those days, I had one anchor me daughters. Evelyn, my firstborn, came into the world when I was still clawing my way up. I remember holding her in the hospital room, her tiny fingers curling around mine, and I swore then and there, everything I build, everything I sacrifice, it will be for her. 2 years later came Clara, sharp-eyed, serious. Even as a little girl she studied me like she could see right through my skin. And finally, Anna, my youngest, the gentle one. She laughed more than she cried, and her joy had a way of softening even the hardest days. When they were small, money meant nothing to them. They didn't care if I came home in a suit or in overalls soaked with sweat. They cared that I showed up, that I read bedtime stories, that I kissed their foreheads, that I cheered in the audience when they danced in school plays. In their eyes, I wasn't a businessman. I wasn't a billionaire. I was just Dad. And those were the happiest years of my life. I tried to raise them with values money couldn't buy. I told them stories of my own childhood, how I had worked for every crumb, how I had walked miles with holes in my shoes, how their grandfather had taught me to never mistake wealth for worth. I hoped, foolishly maybe, that my lessons would shield them from the poison money can bring. But time changes things. As the girls grew older, I began to notice shifts. Evelyn, glamorous and ambitious, gravitated toward the spotlight. Even as a teenager, she chased luxury designer clothes, elite circles, friends whose worth was measured in the brands they wore. Clara, disciplined and sharp, wasn't as flashy, but she was ambitious in her own way. She measured herself in achievements, always looking for the next rung to climb, the next benefit to gain. Anna was different. She seemed untouched by all of it. She was happiest when she was helping someone else, when she was giving rather than taking. At the time, I told myself these were just phases, just personalities, but in my gut, I felt the stirrings of something darker. Because the truth is, wealth doesn't just change strangers, it changes family too. And as I looked at my 3 daughters, so different, so beautiful, so precious to me, I began to realize something that shook me more than any business deal ever could. Building billions wasn't the hardest challenge of my life. The hardest challenge was protecting it. Protecting it from outsiders, from opportunists, and maybe even from the very daughters I had built it for. Wealth is like fire. It can warm a home, or it can burn it to ashes. And though I didn't know it then, one day that fire would force me to test the people I loved most. Because daughters don't stay little forever. And when mine grew into women, the innocence I once held on to began to fade. And with it, so did my trust. Children grow fast. Too fast. One day you're holding their tiny hands, steadying their first steps, and the next, you're watching them walk into a world you can't control. For years, I had told myself that no matter how large my fortune grew, I could protect my daughters from the poison that money brings. I truly believed I could raise them with values strong enough to resist greed. But as they grew older, I began to see how little control I actually had. The changes didn't come all at once. They slipped in quietly, like shadows lengthening at sunset. At first, it was in the small things, the way Evelyn began to care more about the designer label on her clothes than the joy of where she was going. The way Clara's once curious questions shifted from, "Why is the sky blue?" to, "How much is this worth?" Even Anna, my youngest, who clung to her innocence longer than her sisters, eventually stepped into adulthood and the temptations that came with it. Evelyn, my firstborn, had always been beautiful, with her mother's eyes and a smile that could light up a room. But beauty, when mixed with wealth, can be dangerous. She loved attention, and the world was all too eager to give it to her. As she grew into a young woman, she was drawn to luxury like a moth to flame. Designer dresses, expensive handbags, sparkling jewelry, none of it was enough. She lived for the parties, the cameras, the company of people whose names carried status. I wanted her to shine, but I couldn't ignore that her light wasn't coming from within, it was borrowed from the glitter of wealth. Clara, my second daughter, was different. She didn't care about parties or glitter. Her ambition was colder, sharper, more calculated. She was the serious one, the disciplined one, the achiever. And I admired that about her. She worked hard, she excelled in school, she wanted to prove herself. But beneath her determination, there was a hunger that unsettled me. Clara didn't just want success, she wanted control. Every achievement was just another rung on the ladder, and she was never satisfied with where she stood. Worse still, I often felt a quiet resentment in her eyes, as though the fortune I had built was something I owed her rather than a gift she might one day inherit. And then there was Anna, my sweet, gentle Anna. While her sisters chased status and control, Anna seemed untouched by it all. She was the one who spent weekends volunteering at the shelter, who brought home stray animals, who gave away her toys as a child to kids who had none. She never wanted the world to know she was the daughter of a billionaire. She only wanted to know that her father was proud of her. With Anna, love was simple. With Evelyn and Clara, love had begun to feel conditional. The differences between them became clearer with each passing year. At family dinners, Evelyn would brag about the latest celebrity she had met, or the exclusive party she'd been invited to. Clara would roll her eyes and say none of it mattered compared to building a real career. Anna would sit quietly, trying to change the subject to something softer, something less shallow-like, a book she was reading, or a charity event she wanted us to support together. But those dinners, which were once filled with laughter, began to feel heavier. I could see it in the way Evelyn dismissed her youngest sister as too soft, or the way Clara dismissed Evelyn as too shallow. Their arguments weren't just about opinions. They were about values, about who they were becoming. And as I sat at the head of that table, I felt the distance stretching between us, a distance money had built brick by brick. I wanted to believe it was normal, that all children change as they grow, that this was just part of becoming adults. But the requests began. Evelyn asked me to buy her an apartment in Paris because, in her words, she wanted to live properly. Clara pressured me to fund her business venture, insisting that with my backing, it was guaranteed to succeed. Anna, in contrast, was the only one who never asked me for anything. Instead, she came into my study, sat across from me, and simply asked how I was doing. The contrast tore at me. I had built my empire for them. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every scar was for their future. But as I looked at them now, I began to wonder if I was building not just their security, but their ruin. One evening, after a particularly heated dinner where Evelyn and Clara argued openly about who would inherit more, though I was very much alive and healthy, I retreated to my study and sat there in the dark. The empire I had built stretched across continents. My businesses employed thousands. My name was printed in magazines and whispered in boardrooms. Yet, in that moment, I felt powerless. powerless in my own home. I thought of my father, a man who had no riches to his name, only calloused hands and simple wisdom. He had left me nothing but lessons, and they had carried me further than any inheritance ever could. What would he think if he saw his granddaughters now, fighting over wealth that wasn't even theirs yet, measuring their worth by numbers and possessions? He would shake his head. He would remind me that wealth can be a gift, but it can also be a poison. And in my home, I could already see the poison spreading. I tried to fight it. I gave them speeches about humility, about kindness, about character. I reminded them of my own childhood, of nights when I went to bed hungry, of mornings when I walked to school with holes in my shoes. I told them that money doesn't make a person better, it only reveals who they already are. But my words were whispers, and money was a roar. It drowned me out. It always does. I wanted to believe there was still time, that with patience, with love, with guidance, I could pull them back, that they could see the fortune not as a ticket to entitlement, but as a responsibility, a legacy. But deep down, a quiet fear was growing inside me, a fear that when I was gone, my daughters would not inherit my dream, they would inherit my curse. And that fear was the seed of everything that came after, because fear is not enough on its own. It festers, it grows, it demands action, and soon enough, their words would turn into actions, actions that would show me the first true taste of greed. Greed doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It doesn't crash through the door wearing a villain's mask. No, greed is far quieter. It seeps in like smoke through the cracks, invisible at first, until the whole room is choking on it. That's what happened in my home. It didn't come all at once. It came in whispers, in little requests, in small compromises that at first seemed harmless, until one day they weren't. Evelyn was the first. She had always been glamorous, always aware of her beauty and the power it carried. But one evening she came to me in my study, and something shifted. I was working late, surrounded by stacks of papers, when she glided into the room. Her perfume hit me before her voice did sweet, expensive, intoxicating. She sat across from me, crossed her legs slowly, and said, almost like it was the most natural thing in the world, Daddy, I think it's time I had a place of my own. Paris would be perfect. All my friends have apartments there. I blinked at her. For a moment, I thought she was joking, but her eyes, perfectly lined with makeup, held no humor. She was serious. Paris? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Why Paris? She smiled, a smile that used to melt me when she was a child. But now it had an edge. Because that's where the life is. That's where the people I need to be around are. I don't want to just visit Daddy. I want to live there properly. And then she said it, the words that cut into me deeper than she realized. Don't act like you can't afford it. You're a billionaire. What's one apartment? I stared at her, my heart tightening. To her, I wasn't her father in that moment. I wasn't the man who had held her when she was sick, or the man who had carried her on his shoulders when she was little. I was a billionaire, a walking checkbook, a man whose worth was measured by what I could buy for her. That was the first whisper of greed. Clara came next, but her approach was different, colder, more calculated. She didn't waltz into my study with perfume and charm. She came with a folder, thick pages, graphs, and projections neatly laid out. She had been working on it for weeks. This is my business plan, she said, pride in her voice. She wanted to start her own firm consulting, she called it. She wanted to make a mark of her own. At first, I was proud. until she told me what she needed to get started. 10 million, she said, her voice steady. That's all. It's guaranteed to succeed. It's nothing for you, nothing for me. She had no idea what those words did to me. I remembered nights when I ate nothing but bread and coffee just to keep my trucks running. I remembered borrowing $500 and working months to pay it back. To me, money had always carried weight, memory, blood. But to her, 10 million was nothing. I tried to explain. I told her that if she wanted to build a business, she needed to struggle for it. She needed to scrape, to fight, to bleed for it, because that's how you learn what it means to succeed. Clara's face hardened. Her jaw set. "So you don't believe in me?" she asked coldly. I tried to tell her it wasn't about belief. It was about strength, about resilience. But she didn't hear that. All she heard was no, and in her eyes that meant betrayal. Evelyn's greed was glamorous. Clara's was sharp. Both cut me in different ways. And then there was Anna. Sweet, quiet Anna. While her sisters dreamed of penthouses and businesses, she came to me with something else. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded nervously, and said, "Dad, the shelter I volunteer at is short on supplies. They need blankets, food, medicine. Do you think we could help them?" I looked at her, stunned. She wasn't asking for herself. She wasn't asking for status or luxury. She was asking for strangers, for people who couldn't give her anything in return. That was Anna, always giving, always thinking of others. The contrast between my daughters was becoming impossible to ignore. I remember one dinner that still haunts me. Evelyn arrived late, sweeping in like royalty, her dress worth more than some people's homes. Clara was already seated, her laptop open beside her plate, numbers glowing on the screen. Anna was in the kitchen helping the staff, her apron dusted with flour. As soon as Evelyn sat down, she launched into a story about a handbag she had bought in Milan. Clara rolled her eyes, muttering something about shallow nonsense. Evelyn snapped back, calling Clara boring and uptight. And before I could intervene, Clara slammed her fork down and hissed, "At least I care about something real. All you care about is spending Dad's money." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "And what do you care about, Clara? Bossing people around? Acting like you're better than us? You're just jealous because you don't know how to enjoy life." Their voices rose, sharper, louder, filling the room with bitterness. And then Clara turned to Evelyn, her face twisted with anger, and said the words that made my blood run cold. "You're pathetic. We all know the only reason you have any of this, the clothes, the parties, the cars, is because of Dad's money. Without him, you'd be nothing." The room went silent. Evelyn's eyes burned with fury, but my heart sank. Without him, without me. That's how Clara saw me. Not as her father, not as a man, but as a source, a fountain, a means to an end. That night, after the table was cleared, I stayed behind. I sat alone, staring at the empty chairs where my daughters had been. I realized then that the love I thought was unconditional had changed. It had become tangled with expectation, poisoned by entitlement, and it only got worse. Evelyn began leaking details about our family to tabloid Steiny things at first, stories spun to make her look glamorous. But soon enough, friends began telling me they'd seen our private lives turned into gossip columns. Clara, meanwhile, was introducing herself at events not as Clara, but as the daughter of a billionaire. My name had become her business card. Every story I heard, every whisper that came back to me was another cut. And yet, through it all, Anna remained steady. She visited me not for money, but for company. She brought me tea when I worked late. She asked how I was feeling. She read with me in silence, her presence a comfort I didn't even know I needed. 2 daughters had shown me their colors. One had not. And as much as it broke my heart, I began to accept a truth I had been resisting for years. If I gave them everything, I would lose everything. Not the fortune that never frightened me. What terrified me was that I would lose its meaning. The billions I had built weren't meant to rot in entitlement. They weren't meant to fuel greed. They were meant to protect, to empower, to preserve a legacy. But a legacy without loyalty is nothing. That was the night the decision took root in me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that my daughters loved me the way they once had. The only way to know the truth, the only way to see who they really were, was to strip away the illusion of wealth. So I made a choice, a painful one. I would hide my fortune. I would put it somewhere no one could see it, no one could touch it. And I would watch. I would see which of my daughters stood by me when there was nothing left to gain. That was the night the loyalty test was born, and once it began, there was no turning back. The night I decided to test my daughters, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk with the lamp turned low and watched the city breathe. Lights blinked on and off in towers I owned. Trucks rolled down highways I paid to pave. Ships I financed cut through dark water halfway across the world. I had spent a lifetime learning how to make money move. Now I had to learn how to make it disappear at least to everyone who was looking for it. I started with the one thing money cannot buy: discretion. I called 2 people before sunrise. The first was my estate attorney, a quiet man with silver hair and a habit of listening all the way to the end. The second was my chief financial officer, a woman who had stood by me through every storm-brutal quarters, hostile bids, market panics that made strong men bite through pens. Both of them picked up on the first ring. Neither asked why I was calling so early. That's why they were mine. I need to restructure everything, I told them. Not for taxes, for truth. They didn't understand yet. They didn't have to. They trusted me. We met before the markets opened, in a conference room with no windows and a table that had heard more secrets than most judges. I laid it out plainly. I wanted my visible net worth to shrink while my real control expanded. I wanted my assets moved where gossip couldn't follow them. I wanted paper that said I was fragileso. I could see who tried to break me and who tried to hold me together. The attorney began to sketch. New trusts, some revocable, some irrevocable. Not for loopholes, but for lines that would separate what the world could see from what only a few would know. We created a private holding company with a name so boring even greed would fall asleep reading it. We transferred shares, voting rights, convertible notes, invisible strings that still looped back to my hand. The CFO built the scaffolding beneath the legal work: custodians, counterparties, shadow, ledgers that matched the light. Then came the visible parts, the parts that would carry the rumors I needed. I sold a penthouse everyone recognized. Not because I needed the cash, but because the headlines would carry further than the elevator ever had. I paused a property development that had my name on the sign. I listed 2 cars and let the paparazzi chew the license plates. I slipped the watch off my wrist and locked it in a vault. None of these things mattered to me, but they mattered to everyone who watched me live. The staff noticed first. Housekeepers with soft eyes, drivers who knew the weight of my silence, gardeners who never looked up while I walked past the lemon trees. I gathered them in the kitchen and told them the truth wrapped in a lie. Things may be tight for a while. I'll ask less of you. I'll pay you the same. If anyone asks about me, say I'm fine and busy. People think money is the loudest thing in the room. It isn't. Loyalty is, and loyalty lives below stairs. Next came the friends who weren't friends. Invitations slowed, then stopped. The private club that never needed my name suddenly needed it spelled, letter by letter. At dinners, men who had once leaned too close to hear my secrets now sat back like I might ask them to split the bill. Perfect. The world was doing half my work for me. But daughters don't read markets. They read faces. Evelyn was the first to smell smoke. She came over in sunglasses as large as her fear. "Dad, are you okay?" "I heard things." She said the last word like it tasted bad. "I'm okay," I said, "but the business is tightening." "Well, see." She paused, looked around the room that was missing a few expensive pieces, and took mental notes as if she were a reporter. Then she put a hand on my shoulder, the way people do when they want to look compassionate in photographs. "Well, I'm hosting a thing next week. Nothing crazy, just a small party. It might be good for you to be seen. You know, remind people. I almost laughed. "I think he'll rest," I told her. She smiled, brittle as spun sugar. "Of course. Do what you need to." Call me if she didn't finish. She was already thinking about lighting, angles, names on a list. She left with a kiss that missed my cheek by an inch. Clara called that night. No sugar, no sunglasses. "Is it true?" she asked. "I'm getting calls. Your credit folks, suppliers. There's chatter you might liquidate some positions." "Some," I said. "We're simplifying." Her breath cracked like ice. "You should have told me earlier. I could have positioned myself. You know I have plans." "I know," I said softly. "I've always known." Silence sat between us. Finally, she said, "We need to talk about contingencies, like a partner, not a daughter." She meant contingencies for her. The call ended with a schedule invite and no goodbye. Anna didn't call. She came. It was late, and I was eating the kind of dinner a lonely man eats: bread, cheese, an apple cut with a pocket knife Eddie carried since the beginning. She stepped into the kitchen like she'd always lived there, kissed the back of my head and said, "That looks terrible," then made eggs and put one on my plate and one on hers. No questions, no barbs, just presence. "Are you sleeping?" she asked. "Enough. You look like you're losing a fight with your pillow." We ate in quiet, our forks a small music. When she finished, she washed the pan and set it to dry. "Do you need anything?" she asked. "I need you to be okay," I said. "Then I am," she answered, and smiled like it cost her nothing. The mask began to fit. I stopped wearing tailored suits every day. I wore the old jacket with a torn pocket that I'd never thrown away. I drove myself to a modest office in a building that nobody Instagrammed. The receptionist there called me sir the way people do when they don't know who you are. I liked it more than I should have. Behind the glass, the work was meticulous. We assigned minority stakes to entities nobody could trace back to the family name. We repapered loans and let the new terms leak. We delayed a dividend, then paid it through a pipe nobody saw. The reports outsiders read would say, sensitive, exposed, watch list. The reports on my desk said, stronger, safer, done. The cost was not only cash, it was memory. I watched my name come down from a wall in a gallery and felt nothing. I let a charity replace me on their board with a banker who'd always wanted my chair. I canceled a gala I used to hate and received 6 texts asking me to reconsider, each ending with a different emoji for urgency. I declined them all, When your life gets quieter, you hear what matters. The test reached the family too. I forgot to send the usual transfers, those invisible streams that kept closets full and schedules light. A week passed, then two, then the calls began. Evelyn's voice was sugar and salt. "Dad, my card got embarrassed," she said. I pictured the card blushing at a boutique counter. "It's probably a mistake," she added quickly. "Can you just fix it?" "He'll look into it," I said. I did and 2 hours later, "Dad, this is ridiculous. People were there. Do you know how that feels?" I told them it was fraud, obviously. "I need this handled today." "What do you need specifically?" I asked. She paused, caught by the strange shape of a boundary. "Money," she said finally, as if the word itself was heavy. "Enough." Clara didn't wait for embarrassment. She put together a dossier. "Here's where you can trim without signaling weakness," she wrote in a clipped email. "Here's where you should cut completely. And here," she added, almost as a kindness, "is a role I can step into if you need a stabilizing announcement." It was a good document, clinical, bloodless. I've bought companies with less diligence. Anna texted a photograph of the lemon tree with 3 small fruits in a bowl. "Made lemonade. Saved you a glass." Then a second message. "You don't have to answer. Just sleep." She didn't ask for a transfer. She brought groceries and left them without a note. She filled the car with gas and tucked the receipt into the sun visor, a child's old habit. She made my house feel less like a stage and more like a home. Still, it wasn't enough to see where they stood when the ground shook. I needed to know who would hold the wall when it cracked. So I widened the test. We announced a strategic review of a division everyone assumed was a cash cow. The press called it a stumble. The market called it caution. The vultures called their lenders. I let the rumors run, not wild, but free. You learn a lot about people by listening to what they repeat. At a family dinner, no staff, no flowers, paper napkins crumpled in the middle. I told my daughters the bones of the lie. "I've made mistakes," I said. "I'm correcting them. It will be lean for a while." Evelyn stared at her phone as if it might give her oxygen. "Lean, how long?" she asked. "As long as it takes." "But what am I supposed to do?" she blurted, then caught herself, tried to soften the edges. "I mean, what should we do?" "As a family. Be a family," I said. Clara made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Let's be serious," she said. "If we don't manage optics, well, I'll pay later. I can help. I can speak to the right people. But we need to be aligned." Anna refilled everyone's water and said nothing. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and the trash tied, I stepped onto the porch. The night was the kind that makes you think about beginnings. Anna joined me with 2 mugs of tea, handed me one, and leaned against the railing. "You're scaring them," she said. "Not accusing, just naming a weather pattern." "I'm scaring myself," I admitted. She bumped my shoulder with hers. "Good. Fear is honest. We've all been a little dishonest. Even me. I pretend I don't mind the noise, but I do. I miss when our house was loud for the right reasons." "What were the right reasons?" I asked. "Birthday songs off-key," she said. "Your laugh when the dog stole your shoe. Mom humming in the hallway." She looked at me through the steam. "I miss you when you're in a room full of people." There it was, the sentence I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. "I miss you when you're in a room full of people." Money makes rooms crowded and hearts far. The next morning, I signed the last piece of paper. The structure was complete. The mask fit like skin. From the outside, I was smaller, From the inside, I was anchored. I felt lighter than I had in years, not because I was poor in public, but because I was closer to the truth. The world responded on schedule. Headlines with verbs like slides, pairs, pauses. A magazine that once called me Titan now called me Veteran. The phone rang less. The doorbell did too. In the quiet, I could hear my daughters living. Evelyn began to curate a new circle that did not include me. Her friends changed. Her captions did too. She stopped tagging me in anything. When she did come by, she wore apology like perfume. "I haven't seen you in forever," she'd say, and I'd smile and ask if forever had been busy. She'd laugh, brittle, and talk about a brand deal that didn't need my name because it had others. Independence masquerading as exile. Clara doubled down. She took meetings with people who used to take meetings with me. She sent me decks I didn't read and deadlines I didn't accept. She wanted to be a general in a battle it'd already ended. One afternoon, she arrived with a list and left with a warning. Don't confuse stubbornness with courage. I wrote the sentence down, not because she was right, but because she might be someday. Anna changed nothing visible. She kept showing up at odd hours with small solutions. A new bulb in the hallway that had flickered for weeks. A coat mended where the lining had torn. A bowl of soup that made the kitchen smell like forgiveness. The test was working. It was also breaking me. Because here is the part nobody tells you. When you test love, you bleed too. Every time I watched one daughter drift and another harden, I felt something inside me bruise. I had asked for truth. It was arriving on time and under budget. It still hurt. I could have ended it there. Called my attorney, unwound the structure, turned the dimmer back up on the public lights, but endings aren't earned that cheaply. I needed to know what happened when the mask didn't just hide wealth, but hinted at ruin. I needed to see who would walk toward me when the crowd ran the other way. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I staged a fall. We let a leak find its way into the right inbox talk of a covenant breach that wasn't, a margin call that would never come. We allowed a supplier to grumble on a line that was always tapped. We missed a payment by an hour, then paid with interest and silence. Small tremors. Enough to rattle china in the cabinets of people who count their cups. The calls came hot, some with fear, some with hunger. A rival offered me a lifeline that had teeth. An old friend suggested a reset that required me to disappear. I smiled into phones and said I was fine. I was not fine. I was ready. And then I waited for the door to open. Evelyn texted an article with a broken heart emoji and the words, "This is insane, about the peace, not about the pain." She followed with a link to a brand retreat in Tuscany. "I'll be off-grid, but can try to get Wi-Fi if you need me." I wrote back, "Enjoy the sunrise." She sent a picture of one that wasn't ours. Clara arrived with a suitcase of urgency. "We need to move now," she said, already opening her laptop. "Sell the division the market thinks you love. Keep the one they've undervalued. It will look like surrender. It won't be." She spoke like a captain eyeing lifeboats. She never once asked if I could swim. Anna knocked, then let herself in because I didn't answer. She found me on the floor with papers spread like fallen leaves. She didn't step on any of them. She sat down, cross-legged, and began to stack the pages by size. "Breathe," she said. "In for 4. Out for 6. We did it together until the dizziness left the room. Then she handed me water and asked, "Who do you need me to call?" I gave her 3 names. She called them. She said nothing about money. She said, He needs a favor, and all three said yes. That night, alone again, I understood I had reached the edge of the plan. The fortune was hidden. The mask was convincing. The tremors had shaken the house, and my daughters had chosen their instincts. Optics, strategy, presence. I still needed one thing more, the moment that would force their hearts to answer a question the mask was on. The fortune was hidden. The papers, the trusts, the headlines, all of it had been carefully crafted to tell one story, that I was no longer untouchable, that my empire, the same empire that had once towered over skylines and industries, was now trembling. I had spent decades building it, and now I wanted to see what mattered more to my daughters, the wealth or the man behind it. Wealth has a strange way of revealing truth. It isn't when you're rich that you see who people really are. It's when the gold is stripped away, when the foundation you've given them begins to crack. I had given my daughters every comfort, every opportunity, but I had never truly tested their love. Not until now. And now, with the illusion of loss surrounding me, I was finally going to see my daughters in their rawest form. The test began quietly. A whisper of financial collapse here, a delayed payment there. Soon the rumors spread that I was over-leveraged, that deals had gone sour, that the great man who had built an empire from nothing might soon return to nothing. Of course, it was all lies, carefully orchestrated lies, but they were believable enough to spread like wildfire. I didn't correct them. I let the world believe I had stumbled, and I waited to see who would run from the smoke and who would step into the fire with me. Evelyn was the first to react. She arrived one afternoon, dressed flawlessly as always, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. She perched on the edge of my sofa like a guest instead of a daughter and asked, "Dad, is it true?" "Are things bad?" I told her softly. "It's been difficult. There are challenges." Her hand flew to her forehead like she was the star of some dramatic play. "Oh my God, Dad, you should have told me sooner. Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? People are talking. They're asking questions." "My friends." She stopped herself mid-sentence, but it was too late. I had already heard what mattered most to her. It wasn't my well-being. It was her image, her social standing. She was worried about whispers in salons and parties, not about her father sitting across from her in pain. I nodded, watching carefully, letting her speak. "Don't worry," I said gently. "We'll manage." But she wasn't listening. She was already pulling out her phone, already calculating who she could still impress without the glow of my wealth behind her. Her eyes weren't on me. They were on herself. Clara's reaction came next. She didn't waste time with dramatics. She called me into her apartment, sat me down across from a table, stacked with files, and spoke like a general preparing for war. "We need to cut losses. Sell assets before they drag you further down. Pull out of ventures that are bleeding cash. I've made a list." She slid papers toward me, her tone sharp and focused. She had thought of everything except me. "Clara," I asked softly, "what if I can't recover?" She blinked, surprised. "Then we liquidate what's left and protect what we can. We salvage." I leaned back, studying her. There was no warmth in her voice, no comfort, only strategy. She wasn't seeing me as her father facing hardship. She was seeing me as a CEO whose failure might damage her future. "Do you ever think about how I'm feeling?" I asked. She hesitated, frowning. "Dad, feelings won't fix this. Decisions will." And in that moment, I understood. To her, my fortune wasn't just security, it was her inheritance, her ticket to power. And she would do anything to protect it, not for me, but for herself. And then came Anna. She didn't call, she didn't text, she simply showed up. I found her in the kitchen one evening, sleeves rolled up, making soup. The house smelled like warmth, like home. She looked up and smiled. "You've lost weight. You're not eating properly." She ladled soup into a bowl, placed it in front of me, and said, "Then, we'll go through it together." I sat there, staring at her, more exhausted than I realized, and whispered, "Things aren't easy, Anna." She didn't flinch. She didn't ask for numbers or strategies. She only put her hand over mine and said, "You're not alone, Dad. Well, figure it out, no matter what happens." For the first time in months, I felt like someone still saw me, not the billionaire, not the empire, just me. But the test wasn't over. I needed to push further to be certain. So I orchestrated a spectacle of public humiliation. At a family gathering, I let it slip that I had been denied the credit for a project. It was a lie, but it landed like truth. The room buzzed with shock. Evelyn flushed with embarrassment, whispering furiously about what people would think. Clara frowned, already strategizing in her head, her mind ticking through possible damage control. But Anna stood up, her voice trembling but strong, and said, "My father has given more than anyone in this room. If he stumbles, we stand with him." The silence that followed was heavy, crushing and liberating all at once. My chest tightened. My throat burned. That was the moment I knew. The mask had done its job. The test had revealed what wealth had hidden. 2 daughters had turned their backs in different ways, one through vanity, the other through cold calculation. And one had stepped closer, ready to carry the weight with me. My heart broke, but it also healed. Because at last I knew the truth. Yet the final chapter of the test had yet to come. The will. The moment when paper, signatures, and silence would expose what even words could not. The test had already spoken, but the storm wasn't over. If anything, it was only gathering more force. Because once rumors spread far enough, they don't just sit quietly in the dark, they claw their way into the light, twisting into sharper lies, louder whispers, crueler assumptions. My empire wasn't collapsing, but the illusion I created made it look like a sinking ship. And when people think you're sinking, they scatter. Business partners stopped calling. Invitations to high society galas evaporated. Even old friends, the ones I thought would never turn their backs, suddenly had other commitments. It was as if I had contracted some invisible disease, and no one wanted to risk standing too close. But it was my daughter's reactions that cut the deepest. Evelyn began to distance herself entirely. Days passed without a word from her, then weeks. When she finally did appear, it wasn't at my side, but in photographs smiling at fundraisers, clinking glasses with men twice her age who, I suspected, were more than happy to comfort the daughter of a fallen billionaire. She wore her pearls like armor, her designer dress like camouflage, as if she could erase me from her reflection by surrounding herself with others who still shined. Clara became colder, more ruthless. She stopped calling me Dad and began addressing me as if I were just another associate in her business world. "You need to restructure. You need to liquidate. You need to let me handle it." Her words weren't laced with care. They were loaded with control. She wasn't helping me, Shay was preparing to replace me. But Anna was different. She came every evening after work, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just with her tired smile. "Eat with me, Dad," she would say, sitting across the table telling me about her day. She didn't ask about money. She didn't ask about what was left. She only asked how I was feeling. And every time she did, a part of me that had grown cold began to thaw. Still, I had to be sure. My heart told me Anna was loyal, but my mind whispered caution. Because when billions are at stake, people can act with masks far more convincing than the one I had worn. So I tightened the screws of the test. I let word slip that I might have to sell the estate, the house my daughters had grown up in, the one where every memory lived. I wanted to see their faces when they thought the walls of their childhood might belong to strangers. Evelyn didn't flinch. She shrugged and said, "Well, at least sell it to someone respectable. It would be humiliating if the wrong kind of people moved in." Clara's jaw tightened, fury flashing in her eyes. "You can't do this. The estate is part of our name, our brand. You'll destroy everything if you sell it." She said our, but she didn't mean family. She meant her reputation. And then Anna whispered, almost in tears, "If you need to sell it, Dad, we'll find another home together. I don't care where, as long as we are under the same roof." That was the breaking point. That was when I knew the loyalty test was complete. My fortune hadn't been the measure of love, it had been the mask that hid it. And, when stripped away, only one daughter still saw me as her father, not as her empire. But tests don't end quietly. They end in fire. And the fire came in the courtroom where the mask would be torn off. The truth would spill into the open, and the world would finally see which daughter had passed and which had failed. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Maybe it wasn't the air itself, but the heaviness in my chest, the tension that made every breath feel sharp and shallow. The high marble walls towered above me like ancient guardians, and the polished floors reflected the echo of footsteps that had carried more weight than they should have. I had been in boardrooms with world leaders. I had negotiated contracts worth billions, yet I had never felt this kind of pressure. This was different. This wasn't business. This was blood. And the blood was mine. Evelyn and Clara entered together, as if united by some invisible pact. Their presence filled the room before they even spoke. They were dressed to kill, not in weapons but in elegant designer suits, perfectly styled hair, their eyes sharp with ambition. They didn't walk like daughters. They walked like predators who had cornered their prey. And I, their father, was the prey. Behind them, their lawyers carried thick folders of paper, each page ready to be flung like a dagger. Their confidence dripped like poison, and every step they took reminded me of just how far they had drifted from the innocence of the little girls I once carried on my shoulders. Anna entered quietly. No entourage, no practiced strut. She chose a simple black dress, her hair tied back, her eyes lowered in humility. She didn't try to win the room with power or appearance. She didn't need to. She carried something the others did in sincerity. She found her seat close to mine, and as she sat down, her hand brushed against mine for just a second. That small touch was enough to steady me. It told me I wasn't entirely alone in this storm. The judge struck his gavel, and the trial began. Evelyn's lawyer rose first. His voice was slick, rehearsed, and full of venom wrapped in politeness. "Your Honor," he said, "my client has reason to believe that Mr. Harrington has squandered, concealed, and recklessly mismanaged family assets. We intend to prove that through his deception, he endangered not only the Harrington estate, but the rightful inheritance of his daughters." Evelyn nodded with the grace of a queen who believed her crown had been stolen. She looked at me with a face that said, "How dare you rob me of what's mine?" Then Clara's lawyer stood, his words cutting deeper than Evelyn's ever could. "Your Honor, my client sacrificed years of her life, her career, her independence, to safeguard the Harrington name. And yet she has been betrayed by her father's deliberate and cruel concealment of the truth." Clara's eyes were cold, trained on the judge, not even bothering to acknowledge me. She played the role of the dutiful daughter wronged by her father, and the audience, the courtroom, was her stage. When it came time for my lawyer to speak, the silence that filled the room was suffocating. He rose slowly, adjusted his tie, and let the pause hang long enough to make everyone lean forward. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a case about mismanagement. This is not a case about negligence. This is a case about intent." His voice was calm but heavy with meaning. Mr. Harrington did not lose his fortune. He hid it, and he did so with purpose. A ripple ran through the courtroom. The air changed. Evelyn's lips parted, her mask of control slipping as confusion sparked in her eyes. Clara leaned forward, almost instinctively, her hunger too great to hide. Whispers filled the benches. Reporters scribbled faster, and even the judge tilted his head, curiosity replacing formality. My lawyer gestured toward me. For years, Mr. Harrington anticipated this day. He understood the corrupting force of wealth, how it could twist loyalty into greed and turn daughters into adversaries. So he made a decision test, a loyalty test. He stripped away the illusion of power, of luxury, of security. He presented himself to his daughters as a man broken, a man in ruin. And he waited. He waited to see not who loved the billionaire, but who loved the father. The eyes of the room turned to me, and I felt the weight of 1,000 judgments pressing down on my shoulders. I rose to my feet. My voice cracked at first, but I swallowed hard and forced it to steady. I never wanted it to come to this. I never wanted to doubt my own children. But when I saw greed in your eyes stronger than love, when I realized the empire I built meant more to you than the man who built it, I had no choice. I had to see the truth for myself. Evelyn exploded. She leapt to her feet, her words spitting fire. "You mean you lied to us? You humiliated us, dragged us through the mud, just to play some twisted game? You ruined everything." Her voice trembled, not with grief, but with rage. Clara wasn't far behind, her mask cracking into shards. "You had no right," she screamed. "No right to treat us like children. No right to play God with our lives. That fortune was ours. We carried your name. We endured your rules. We earned it." The judge banged his gavel for order, but their voices clashed like thunder. And then, in the middle of that chaos, Anna's voice rose aloft, trembling but powerful enough to pierce every wall. "You're wrong," she said, her words echoing louder than their shouting. "It was never about the fortune. It was about being there when he had nothing. It was about love, not money. And you failed." Her words silenced the room. For a moment, all the marble, the gavel, the lawyers, they disappeared. It was just me and my daughters, and the raw truth exposed between us like a wound. Evelyn's face flushed red with fury. Clara's hands shook as she gripped the table, but Anna sat still, her gaze fixed on me, her loyalty carved into every syllable. The judge leaned forward, his tone deliberate and cautious. "Mr. Harrington, are you telling this court that the fortune still exists? That the billions are not gone, but hidden?" I took a deep breath. My chest rose and fell with the gravity of the moment. I turned to Anna, our eyes meeting, and then faced the judge. "Yes, Your Honor, every cent exists." The fortune was never lost. It was hidden, waiting for this very day. The room erupted in gasps, whispers, the scribbling of pens, the clicking of cameras. The noise swirled around me like a storm, but I barely heard it. My pulse was pounding too loudly in my ears. The test was almost over. The truth was ready to be revealed. And when it was, the world would finally know who among my daughters had loved me, and who had only loved my fortune. The silence after my confession hung like a blade suspended in the air. You could almost feel it pressing down on everyone in the room, the judge, the lawyers, the crowd, my daughters. For years they had believed the fortune was gone, that I was a man ruined by bad luck or reckless decisions. But now, with just a few words, I had cracked open a vault of truth that no one was prepared for. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his voice deliberate, as if he needed to taste every word before it left his mouth. "Mr. Harrington, are you telling this court that the rumors of bankruptcy, the stories of your downfall, the supposed ruin of your empire were all a fabrication?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. Every headline, every whisper, every pitying glance, it was all part of the illusion I allowed to grow. The fortune wasn't destroyed. It was moved, locked away, hidden under layers so deep even the most relentless hunters couldn't trace it. I wanted the world to see me as broken, because in that brokenness, the truth of loyalty is revealed." The audience gasped again, and Evelyn's lawyer nearly dropped his pen. Clara's eyes widened, greed surging through her like fire through dry grass. She leaned forward, her voice trembling with restrained desperation. "Then, where is it, Father? Where are the billions? Where have you hidden them?" I turned my head toward her. "You've already failed the test, Clara. The moment you asked that question, you showed me what mattered most to you." Her face tightened, and she spat back. "Don't you dare lecture me when you've lied and deceived us for years." Evelyn's voice cut in, sharp and bitter. "This isn't a test, Father. This is cruelty. You starved us of what was ours. You dragged our names through the dirt. And for what? To feel powerful one last time?" I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. My voice, when it came, was low, steady, but filled with a weight that silenced even their fury. "No, not for power, for peace, for the peace of knowing that when I leave this world, my legacy won't be built on greed. That the empire I created won't become the rope that strangles the soul of my family. I needed to know which of my daughters loved me, and which of my daughters loved only the shadow of my wealth." The judge raised his hand, bringing the room back under control. "Mr. Harrington, the court must ask, if this fortune exists, if it has been hidden, then who holds the keys? Who decides where it goes from here?" My heart pounded, every beat echoing through me like a drum. This was the moment, the culmination of years of silence, deception, and sacrifice. I rose from my seat, my knees stiff from age, but my spirit stronger than it had been in years. "The keys are mine," I said, my voice carrying across the room with a force that surprised even me. But the choice of who inherits them, that choice was made long before this courtroom. That choice was made when one daughter stood beside me when the world thought I had nothing, when she defended me without asking for a penny, when she saw me as her father and not as her fortune. Every eye turned to Anna. She didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't lower her gaze. She simply sat there, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall, her lips pressed tightly together, as if she were holding the entire weight of the moment inside her chest. Evelyn's face twisted with disbelief. She slammed her palm on the table. This is madness. You can't possibly leave everything to her. She didn't build this empire, we did. We sacrificed. We endured your rules, your endless demands. And this is how you repay us? But her words bounced off me like rain on steel. The truth was already alive in the room, pulsing like a heartbeat no one could ignore. I turned toward the judge once more. The fortune, I said slowly, letting each word fall with the gravity of a verdict, is held in a trust. The asset stocks, real estate, accounts spread across continents amount to just over $1,320,000,000. That trust was built with the foresight of a man who knew this day might come. And within that trust are ironclad conditions. Conditions written to ensure that only one daughter, only the daughter who proved loyalty, will inherit it all. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Lawyers shouted, cameras clicked, reporters scrambled to capture every word. Evelyn and Clara's outrage boiled over into screams, their voices colliding in a storm of fury and desperation. But beneath the noise, Anna sat still, her chest rising and falling with quiet disbelief. She had no words, only the silent weight of a truth she hadn't expected, but had always deserved. I looked at her, and in that instant I saw my late wife in her kindness, her strength, her quiet but unshakable faith in the things that truly mattered. My voice broke slightly as I said, "Anna, you were the only one who loved me when I was poor. You were the only one who saw the man, not the money. The loyalty test was never about wealth. It was about heart. And you passed." Anna's tears finally fell, streaking down her face as she rose to embrace me. I felt her arms around me, strong yet trembling, and for the first time in decades the burden of my secret lifted. As Evelyn and Clara's protests echoed uselessly through the courtroom, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The empire was safe. My legacy was safe. My heart, though bruised, was finally at peace. And in that moment, the test was over. The billions would no longer be a curse passed through greedy hands. They would rest with the only one who proved she valued me more than the fortune itself. I had hidden my billion-dollar fortune from my daughters, and in the end, only one passed the loyalty test.